Hello, everybody. Welcome. Vodcast Underground, Ep.7. This is our continuing series in our top 20 albums. We started with the 1980s, and then we're going to finish up with the decade that we're almost through with here in a few days. The last episode, Episode 6, was the 90s. We did our top 20 of the 90s from 1990 to 1999. It's a lot of fun. Notice we got some early comments, so appreciate everybody who's watched and commented. This latest episode is going to be the first decade of the new millennium, 2000 to 2009. And same format, top 20. So once I introduce Corey here, Corey is again my co-host, so he'll be chiming in with his favorite records. Then we will get going. So Corey, thanks again, man, for jumping on and busting through the top 20 of the 2000s.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, and just looking forward to this one. So on to the new millennium, right? We got the 80s and 90s behind us. Look, going into 2000s, I remember the excitement. I remember the Y2K scare.
Oh, that was funny.
The world was going to fall apart. Planes would be dropping out of the sky. And the music in the music world, or at least in my hard rock and metal world, I saw a lot of fractions, a lot of things split off. We have new metal, NEW, and then it's relabeled NU metal. We've got this crazy rap metal kind of coming out of the late 90s into the 2000s. And but then as you go on into the early 2000s, into the mid 2000s, hope is restored again with some seminal, killer albums, and some new bands emerge onto the scene, just revitalizing metal, and then closing out the decade with some fantastic albums, but also a little rocky there as well. But Ozfest was huge. It started in the late 90s and continued to spread the word. Metal kind of found its life again, but then it came, and then the metalcore scene started, and then Hot Topic came out, and then they made it a product. So you have the birth basically of metalcore coming out of the 90s, becoming this huge thing, and then falling apart too. And so we'll take a look at some of those bands that had some really good albums, but then also probably where metalcore unraveled and kind of landed. So yeah, looking forward to exploring this decade with you and what your album picks were.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, all right there. The 2000s, I think I've mentioned in every video we've done so far how difficult it was to narrow down to 20 albums. And this is, no difference here. This is super difficult. But honestly, this first decade, especially in the 2000s, was super difficult because there was lots of great bands, lots of great albums. But I think the thing that made it the most difficult for me was the fact that, and you mentioned it, metal fractured all over the place. I mean, we had, 4 or 5 subgenres in the 90s, at least that we knew about, right? And then maybe in the 80s, you had 3 big ones. And then as soon as you hit Y2K, man, metal just exploded to, I mean, you can't even count how many genres there are. And that all happened in the 2000s, it's death metal and blackened death metal and prog metal and, death prog, and I've heard folk metal and Viking metal. I mean, it's just endless.
That's right,
and all these bands get classified. And I guess it's a way to help people figure out what they like. I'm okay with genres, but when they start getting just crazy, where you could, like Sam Dunn's metal family tree with all these different subgenres and then subgenres of subgenres, it gets crazy and it's hard to keep up. It's almost overwhelming. And I found that to be the case as I was putting my list together, obviously going through my my collection and things that I was listening to back then and still to this day, and then looking at lists online from old publications to websites like Loudwire, who have revisited that first decade and put stuff on there, and it was insane. It was information overload, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah, and then you maybe, and while you were talking, I'm thinking internet, the widespread internet going into every home became broadband. I remember having an old gateway computer and then being able to access and trying to find music videos and music that way. And I'm not talking about Napster and downloading and that kind of thing. That was going on too, but I was able to find music videos. I was able to go onto IRC internet and start trying to find underground videos, especially between like 2002 and 6, with a lot of the metalcore coming out. So the internet and information age was changing things as well. And then I think there's still one lesson that we as fans, or I saw it a little bit too often. I'm not as guilty of it, but I don't think we learned a lesson with people becoming so passionate about the music that they identify with one genre, and they fold their arms and they look down their nose at every other genre, everything, and think it's garbage, or they're or actually insult people for liking alternative metal, or your metal's not extreme enough. And I still think that we didn't learn our lesson from the 80s, where we where you had a dichotomy of what's all great metal, living side by side, but you had people, break, like you had the punks versus the metalheads and those kind of things in the 80s. But we still saw that. We still never learned our lesson going into the 2000s. I don't know if your experience was the same.
Yeah, good point. That's a great point, actually. And I don't think it's gotten better. We didn't learn our lesson in the 80s and 90s, and we still haven't learned our lesson up to today. And this is my personal opinion. I don't want to upset anybody, but as a fan of heavy music, of heavy metal, hard rock, whatever you want to call it, that we all love, I don't think, and again, my personal opinion, I'm not saying anybody, is terrible for if they think this way, but I don't think you can be a true fan of metal if you can't try and embrace all of it. Because if you're only a fan of one genre, I only like thrash, I only like death metal, I only like glam metal or whatever, it's not going to progress. It's not going to continue for fans of future generations. It's going to die if people can only, identify with one part of metal and that's metal to them. I just don't think it can progress and be healthy as we move forward. So I think, and it doesn't mean you have to like every band and you don't have to like every genre. That's fine, but I think you need to at least try and embrace it, try and give it a chance, because there's a lot of stuff there that honestly I think people will like if they give it a chance. Don't just look at the guy and because he's wearing white face paint or whatever, dressed like whatever metalcore kids dressed like back in the day with like the swoop and the lip ring. I mean, don't judge a book by its cover. Give it a chance. And I honestly think that by doing that, metal will continue to progress for future generations. It's not going to die with a bunch of, elitists who, like you said, turn their nose up and fold their arms and say, well, I only like, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and those bands. It's like, no, you got to, because those bands, they're preaching the same thing. I mean, Rob Halford's a perfect example. That guy has openly discussed multiple genres, and he's also made and participated in multiple genres of metal, not just, the Judas Priest traditional style of heavy metal. So if the Godfathers can do it, I think we can do it too.
Yeah, and on that same note, don't judge that 30-year-old guy the clean cut guy walking into the music store with no tattoos, and a generic T-shirt, not having the coolest band. Don't make fun of those people and push them out of the record store either. I mean, they could be just as much a metalhead or a musician as the other guys that could be fronting.
Some of the biggest, most diverse metalheads I've ever known were suit and tie guys during the day, right? I've known like full on metal musicians who played in metal bands by night, and you know, well, the guy was a lawyer, worked as a lawyer by day, and you wouldn't know it if you watched him, in his seeing a show. You're like, what? This guy's a lawyer? Like, it's completely different. But yeah, that's a good point too, because anybody can be a fan of metal. That's the great thing about it, is anybody from any walk of life, from any really whatever, no matter what you believe, can find, I think, a band and a style that they can identify with, if that makes sense.
All right, I feel like let's just skip.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if you agree, I'd like to skip reading through all of them, and then let's just get into the list and kind of reveal them as we go, because I know eventually you'll upload the list below and people can kind of skim through those as they're listening. I recommend we just jump in with 2000 and get it started there, John.
Yeah, we'll just read the list and then talk about them as we go. Yep, agreed.
Okay.
All right. So 2000, year 2000, first year of the new millennium. We have actually 4 bands: Deftones, White Pony, Pantera, Reinventing the Steel, Opeth, Blackwater Park, and then Iron Maiden, Brave New World. And actually, Opeth, Blackwater Park needs to go to 2001. Sorry about that. Disregard that. I put it in the wrong one. So Deftones, White Pony, Pantera, Reinventing the Steel, Iron Maiden, Brave New World. If you want to.
So you're kind of giving me a window there to jump in. So Deftones, White Pony. I wanted to try and come up with these amazing adjectives and album reviews, but I'm not going to drop that on you. But so I've got my notes here in front of me, and of course, Chino on vocals, and we had the appearance. It's famous for the appearance with Maynard on the song "Passenger." But I feel like White Pony from the Deftones is a killer album. It also brings in the new millennium. I think it creates its own atmosphere that it feels dangerous. And also maybe tempting, and it has its own atmosphere, and it just drives, and it just has incredible vocals from Chino, where he's kind of channeling a little bit of Billy Corgan, maybe.
Yeah, I could see that.
And also maybe the Smiths, and more gothic stuff, maybe from The Cure as well. So you kind of have this big blend in there, and I think this is probably one of their best albums. And I was really glad when this came out as a vinyl reissue, because when I started collecting, trying to find this on vinyl, if it was even released on vinyl, I don't know, but it came out, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I immediately bought it the day it came out and was glad to have it in the collection and revisit that album.
Yeah, agreed. This is where the Deftones shed that new metal label and showed that they were much, much more than, just following in like Korn's shadow, even though they pretty much came out the same year in the mid 90s. And they were, part of two different things going on in California at the time. You mentioned it: goth, new wave, alt rock, of course, metal. I hear very little new metal trappings in this. There's down-tuned guitars and kind of the low end boom in some of the songs, but it's so much more. And I was glad that you had this on your list in addition to me, because I really wanted this record to make the list. This is probably my favorite Deftones record as a whole. Deftones are a band kind of like, I don't know, Alice in Chains, where they never really released a bad album, right? Not every album is great, but every album is a good, solid album with multiple songs. And they seem to all be different, right? They have their own thing, it's them, but every album they progress, and adds another layer on top. And I think that, starting with White Pony, you can kind of see that. And
and then like with Gore, with Gore, I didn't get it at first. I didn't like Gore when it first came out, but revisiting that, I have a whole new appreciation for that album. But I do like Koi. I'm gonna forget Koyoi Yokan or whatever it is.
Yeah,
I really like that album too. I think it brings a lot of the same things as White Pony did, as ambient, atmospheric, escape when I listen to Deftones.
Yep, they're really good at that. So, yep, awesome. Deftones, White Pony, Pantera, Reinventing the Steel. Love this record. I know a lot of people were kind of torn with this, and little do people know, this everybody, focuses on the last half of Pantera's career and the separation of Phil Anselmo on one side and Rex to a certain extent, and then the brothers Abbott on the other side, and especially with their '96 album, Southern Trendkill. I mean, they were doing the music in Texas, and then Phil was cutting vocals in his native New Orleans, right? So there was this disconnect. They're basically patchworking an album together, and so everybody, I think the narrative throughout the years with Reinventing the Steel was that actually happened the same way. But upon reading, Rex Brown's book, and then another, I think it was a '90s metal book, a couple of years ago, we find out that they actually recorded together as a cohesive unit, and at least on the surface, it looked like Pantera was back, right? They had patched up their differences. Phil, we thought, had maybe kicked his heroin habit, and they were, back to being the true force in metal that they were throughout the entire '90s decade. And then, of course, we know what happened only a couple of years later. So, but I mean, what a way to go out if that's going to be your last record. Reinventing the Steel. I mean, it's got the classic Pantera sound, as all their records do. The riffs are there. I think the songwriting is a little more focused from Anselmo. It's a little more cut and dry. And then they even, they have an anthem, a killer anthem track on this record with Revolution. Revolution is my name. I just remember seeing the video for that with like the kids dressed up like, Phil's long hair Phil at that time. And then, the kid dressing up like Dime and Vinny and Rex, and watching them basically just looks like a warehouse jamming. But that's a killer. The best part about that song, and this is the best part about Pantera, is, and that's why they get labeled groove, but the breakdown in that song is got to be one of the best breakdowns in all of metal ever, right?
Wow.
And that's what they're known for. I love the breakdown in Revolution is my name. So, but killer Pantera record. I love it.
No, I appreciate those insights. I haven't read a lot of literature on the band yet, but I didn't feel like they were missing a beat. I mean, it was just another Pantera delivered.
Yep.
That was heavy as a 10-ton hammer. It was just pedal to the metal. It was so heavy, and just here's another Pantera album. I thought the album cover was a little corny, but it did kind of remind me of my friends with late at night betting each other to jump through the fire. So I get it. But
that's Pantera fans, right? That
sums
right. Up Pantera fans.
So I thought the cover was like, what's going on with the cover? But just another release from Pantera that said all is well to the fans, and expect more Pantera to come. Everything's fine in the Pantera camp.
Yeah, it's sad to this day that we'll never ever see Pantera again, regardless of what Phil's doing right now with his band The Illegals, which is great. I'm glad they're paying homage to the legacy of Pantera, but unfortunately this is it for Pantera. And I guess that's something that I'll always be sad about, that it didn't end better than it did. And of course it ended in tragedy, and those things happen, unfortunately. So, but Pantera, Reinventing the Steel, great album. Last one in the year 2000, we have Iron Maiden, Brave New World. Now, it took me a little while to get on board with this album, and look at me taking my own advice. When this first came out, at that point, I was into like super heavy stuff, and I didn't want to go back. So I kind of thumbed my nose up at it. I was like, Maiden's great. I don't need to hear any more Maiden. They're releasing new records. They sound the same. They're just not relevant. And then, of course, I was dead wrong, and shame on me for not taking my own advice and embracing the old with the new, because Brave New World is a killer return to form for Maiden. And it's, what a way to kick off the 2000s for a classic metal band, when many of their peers, almost all of their peers, were either done or, maybe were on hiatus, or maybe there was one original member left. I mean, Maiden's full force here with this record.
Yeah, how could it be possible that Iron Maiden is still releasing relevant, and not only relevant, but 10 out of 10 albums in 2000. But Bruce Dickinson coming back into the band.
That's another
A lot
point I forgot
of
to mention.
fans were anticipating that. The incredible album artwork. It was a way to kind of revisit your youth and take a break and appreciate, a new wave of British heavy metal again.
Yeah.
In a new way. And very memorable songs that, like, if I listen to that CD or the
Anthems,
record, they just stick in my head for like a week, or they'll just hit me out of nowhere. But love that album. It's and I was really glad that was reissued on vinyl recently as well.
And like you said, it's a way to go back and revisit the awesome new wave of British heavy metal sound that pretty much set the stage for everything that we love about metal today. But I think with this record too, there's enough great tight songwriting, and there's enough new elements in the band. They still have the twin leads and all that, but there's enough progression, right, in this record that enabled them to not just be a throwback nostalgia band, right? That, like you said, continue to release 10 out of 10 albums in the 2000s and still to this day. So let's hope that Maiden continues to release killer records into this new decade. So Iron Maiden, Brave New World. All right, 2001, we have two records. I already mentioned one of them accidentally, but we have Tool with Lateralis, and we have Opeth for real with Blackwater Park. Tool, Lateralis, again, frustrating as Tool has become. It's kind of their MO. No one thought we would have to wait another 14 years for a Tool record after 10,000 Days, but with Lateralis, what was that, 5 years between records? And I just remember this the same type of thing. Is Tool going to release a record? They're already, released a record. We've heard leaks on Napster or whatever the file sharing programs were at the time. Is it going to come out? Is it going to come out? And then we finally get the record, and it's a Tool record. Killer Tool record.
Yeah, I can't remember if they did a midnight release for that or not, but
I think they did.
Lateralis. I can't remember. I don't remember going there. I remember doing that with 10,000 Days, but I remember picking that up and just amazing. It kind of. But I mean, it's just an amazing immersive album. I'm a Tool fan, so a lot of people are like, "Oh, okay, of course he likes it. They can do no wrong."
Right.
But they also shed some of the stuff where it was being overplayed on our local, like 99.7 The Blitz.
Yeah,
they just overplay, the Anima album. So this is fresh Tool, and it felt like it was for fans. They just go on these big long excursions, and I think we had Salival in between. Was it Salival got released between Anima and Lateralis? But
I forgot about that.
But it's just incredible, just immersive. It's a trip. I have my favorite copy of that is on HD CD. That's one of my favorite mixes to listen to. It's really high quality, and I'm really looking forward to a regular vinyl release. That's not I had the picture disc and I sold it. It sounded so bad I sold it, and I didn't like the song order. So I mean, and that goes to, I cannot wait for Tool to reissue all of their stuff on vinyl.
Yeah, if that ever
Please,
happens.
no picture disc.
I can't wait till they release their newest record on vinyl, if that ever happens.
So I don't want to talk much about it because, you and I are both so frustrated with that. Let's just move on.
I know, right? Again, you said it all right there. Great record. It was a record for the fans. They could have cashed in with the success of Anima, but they didn't. They released a true prog gem. Tool, Lateralis. Okay, last record in 2001, we have Opeth with Blackwater Park. This is our first entry really on our list. So we're talking about one of a newer band really. Opeth is as many fans may know out there, a progressive death metal band. They didn't really start out as prog. I think they were more straight death early on in the late 90s, but they very quickly moved into the progressive sound with this record. This was my introduction to Opeth, was Blackwater Park. And I've always been a fan of progressive music. I've always liked it. Being a guitar player, I've always appreciated just high level musicianship. And this record is amazing. And and I forgot about this, but in my notes, this record, are you familiar with the band Porcupine Tree, Corey?
No.
So they are and all the prog nerds out there are probably shouting at the screen, yes, Porcupine Tree, but they are a prog rock band that's been around for a long, long time. I think they released their first record in the 80s, but if you look at, best of prog music lists, Porcupine Tree is always on there. But their frontman, Steven Wilson, actually collaborated with Opeth on this record, Blackwater Park. And I don't know if it was intentional that they brought him in, but what I do know is that his direction, his influence, because he was also a producer as well, was all over this record. So you can see the Steven Wilson Porcupine Tree influence with Blackwater Park. It's heavy. It's that you always talk about, time signatures and time changes and all that stuff with metal. But I mean, this record, it's definitely not an accessible record right off the bat, especially if you're not into prog music or progressive music. Maybe you don't understand what they're doing, but if you give it a chance, man, listen to it fully and give it a shot, I guarantee you're going to find something in there that you like, because it's a phenomenal record. This is one of my favorite records of the new millennium.
Wow. I got nothing to add to that because I got to do my homework on that one.
That's right.
That's my listening homework.
Yep, do it, man. You'll like it. Like I mentioned before we started filming, the original obviously is probably too expensive. And to be honest with you, I don't even know if they have an original vinyl copy. I'm sure they do. Most 2000s band released records had initial pressings, but the copy to own is the I think it came out in 2016 or 2017. Music on Vinyl, the Dutch reissue label, they did all their records, I believe, but they did this one, and it's a killer pressing, super dynamic. So highly recommended. Opeth, Blackwater Park, 2001. All right, that moves us into 2002. 2002, kind of all over the place here. I see we have really only one metal band here and two hard rock bands. So we have Soilwork, Natural Born Chaos, Audio Slave with their self-titled debut, Audio Slave. And then this was one of my picks, but Queens of the Stone Age with Songs for the Deaf, killer record. So Corey, I'm not as familiar with Soilwork. I do know this album. I like this album, so I'll let you intro Soilwork.
Yes. So with Soilwork, they have Swedish. They're from Sweden, Swedish melodic death metal. They have probably 2,000 albums released. I think they have 18, 19 studio albums out there. So you have different eras and a lot of people coming and going in the band. But they have some real diamonds, some really great gems out of their catalog that I really like. Like their debut album is really awesome. Natural Born Chaos, the one we're talking about here. The Living Infinite, check that one out. It was more recent. I forget if that was 2017 or 16. But The Living Infinite is another fantastic album, and as well as Stabbing and Drama. But Natural Born Chaos, melodic. It has scream parts. It has clean vocals, but also has a little bit of the keyboards with just the right mix. The album closer is fantastic with Soilworker's Song of the Dead, and has Devin Townsend is actually part of that track. So
he produced. He was one of the producers for this record, was he not?
Yeah, I think so. Produced with the band, and then actually contributed to there on the last track. So he was doing. Devin was really busy in the early 2000s, and so this is one of his projects, and I think he helped make that album a lot better. It's one I really enjoyed. It was in a lot of my metal mixes for a few years. That songs from that album.
Yeah, like you said, killer record. I think the thing that stands out for me with not just this album, but really many of their albums and many of the Swedish melodic death metal scene is it's in the title, is the melody, right? Nobody ever thought that you could have death metal with, hummable or singable melody. When you think death metal,
right?
you're not thinking that. You're thinking, Cannibal Corpse, and it's like just straight blast beats and ultra guttural low growling, and which I like that stuff. But to be able to put melody into a extremely heavy and complicated form of metal that's a testament to Soilwork, because like I said, along with a few other bands from that scene, from that time, they did it, if not better than them all, it's just as good as them all. So highly recommended album, Natural Born Chaos. This is probably my favorite record, at least right now, for Soilwork. With Soilwork, with the records that I am familiar with them, like you said, they've got like 100 records released, or 19 records released. I've kind of switched back and forth between which ones are my favorite, but this killer record, if you're not familiar with them, I think is a good starting point.
And a hard-working band, they always stay on top, always in the, working on new releases and writing music and keeping the band going, incarnations of the band. So just a really hard-working band too, that, they work their asses off to be where they're at.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Soilwork, Natural Born Chaos. Next one, Audio Slave. Some of you are probably like, either yelling or cheering at the screen. I know that Audio Slave, just that style of music is not everybody's cup of tea. You might think it's odd for a metal chart or a metal album list, but the title is hard rock and heavy metal, and I just thought that this record needed to be included. Obviously, Audio Slave's Chris Cornell got together with the remaining members of Rage Against the Machine, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like Rage Against the Machine with Soundgarden's singer, right? But the riffs are straight Rage. But one thing I will say that this album did is it showed a different side to Tom Morello's playing. He still has the Rage, unique style with leads and the different things that he does, the DJ-like sounds that he gets out of his guitar, but he also has a lot of more melodic, more traditional style of playing in this record. I mean, there's even a couple like traditional guitar solos in this record, which you generally don't think of that when you think of Tom Morello, because he is such a different kind of player. But I mean, to think you have Soundgarden, which broke up, 5 years prior. Rage Against the Machine had broken up maybe 3 years prior. And who would have ever thought in a million years that you would take someone from Soundgarden and the band members from Rage Against the Machine and put them together and that it would work? I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, that is going to be a disaster. Why are
super groups usually don't work out?
Yeah, I was not. Honestly, I was interested to hear what it was going to sound like, but I did not have a high expectations for this. And you know what? I stand corrected. I was wrong. It's a great hard rock record. It was different than anything else that was coming out at that time. Obviously you have new metal, and then you had like the post grunge thing, which I didn't think that Audioslave was either of those things. I thought they stood out from that. And especially when music was dominated by what I think is just terrible post-grunge bands, copycat bands, they kind of stood out in the middle of that, right? And they kind of rose above it, because they could have got lumped in with that, and they could have very easily cashed in and done something like that, coming from two bands who were influential in Rage Against the Machine in the new metal, rap metal genre, and then of course Cornell with Soundgarden coming from the Seattle grunge scene. He influenced all those post-grunge bands that came later. So they could have cashed in on that, but they didn't. They released just a solid hard rock record.
And Audioslave, when that first, what a band name. What a great band name. That is incredible. And when that released, when Audioslave released, it was like, it just shattered. For me, it just like that typical breaking up through the ice and everything falling to pieces.
Glass wall.
Like you said, it just shattered everything that was going on at the time. And like you said, building on that said with, Rage minus Zach, and then you take plus Cornell equals the music that Audioslave made was like mind blowing. It was total. It was rock and roll. It was heavy rock.
Yeah.
And it was original. The political drive in the lyrics was taken out. And it gave people something really, for me, it gave me something I can sink into. like the video of Cochise, you know, a band without a singer, and then there's Chris Cornell waiting, and then they come in, they bring it in, and then the fireworks go off. The other two videos that came out of that, Show Me How to Live. I love that video because I love the 1970 Dodge Challengers. I love the 70s movies, especially car movies like Vanishing Point. And to take all of that and put that all together into that video, it's an outstanding video and just a killer song, Show Me How to Live. I mean, that when I saw that video on my computer, I was, acting like the DJ in the video, just getting crazy in front of the computer screen, and just would watch that over and over.
That's awesome.
It makes me think of also the Gorillaz. The Gorillaz do a little nod with a song called Stylo. In 2010, they do a little nod to the movie, but then also I think to Audio Slave. There's a lot of different elements there, but I think Audio Slave, frustratingly, underrated. Me and a friend Rob at work, we loved Audio Slave, and we're talking about the band. We're bringing CDs into work, and wonder why our other people we'll work with don't know the band or don't care. I'm like, what do you? Somehow that was just frustratingly underrated, and I think that's what, I don't know what you said, if they got swept up into maybe they were too early, maybe it was a supergroup curse where supergroups usually don't work. I don't know what it is, but the first two Audio Slave albums are just incredible, and it's fantastic fresh music for 2002.
Yeah, I completely agree, because they shed anything, because they didn't sound, like I said, they didn't sound like Soundgarden, the music, and they didn't sound like Rage Against the Machine as far as, with the rapping frontman. And by combining those, they created a completely different sound. So
Like a Stone, before we move on, Like a Stone, I've literally pulled off on the highway, tears in my eyes, listening to that song with Morello's solo. And then now, like when I was going back and listening to it, getting ready for this video, thinking about Chris Cornell, and then just kind of get that Like a Stone is just incredible. And you strip away all of the flash and dash. Look at that video; it's just a raw video, and all the elements that are typically thrown into videos to promote them, not there. Just the band, just rock and roll, just I don't know. Rest in peace, Chris, and also Audio Slave. It was a good time.
Yes, it was. So last thing I'll say about this is just, I remember, the first time I saw them and heard them was MTV premiered their first public performance, and they're on top of Radio City Music Hall. It's a band outside, getting ready to perform for Times Square, and they kicked it off with Cochise. And I remember watching that and then hearing Chris Cornell's like ungodly, insane, otherworldly scream in that song, and I'm like, wow, this is not what I expected at all. This is awesome. Even though Chris Cornell looks kind of weird with his spiky blonde tipped hair, but I mean, come on, who didn't have dyed hair in 2002?
That's right. Going back, he does look a little bit different.
So anyways, yep, killer record. Audio Slave 2002. All right, the last record on this year is Queens of the Stone Age, Songs for the Deaf. What can I say about this? I'm a huge Queens of the Stone Age fan. I was a huge Caius fan. I've pretty much followed this band from the very beginning, from when they first released their first record in '98, and then all the way to today. This song here was, I think, the Queens. Yes, they had their own sound, but their first two records, I think Josh Homme, or Homme, however you say his name, still had one foot kind of dragging back in the Caius sound, right? That desert rock sound, even though Queen still maintains that unique sound and style of guitar playing that he has. I think with this record, they came into their own, really. This is Queens of the Stone Age. If you were just going to get into Queens of the Stone Age, you've never heard one thing from them, this is the record that I would recommend that you start with. It's a killer record. It's a heavy record. It basically starts, it's kind of cool. It's almost a concept record. They start it with like some sound promos of like a guy driving through the desert trying to find a radio station, and he's checking the channels, and then
I love that.
Start. So the way that they did that is awesome. And he brought in two pretty heavyweight rock star players for this record. I mean, on drums, you have Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters, and he had been friends with Josh from back in the Caius days, which I didn't know that until this record came out. And then Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees fame, Josh Homme had, I guess, was a touring guitarist for them for a year or two after the breakup of Caius and right before the breakup of Screaming Trees. And so Lanigan is a vocalist on this record too. And they list him as part of the band. So, and then I just remember the video for No One Knows, which was that summer. That was the hot rock single of the summer. You couldn't go anywhere without someone having their car windows down without that song blasting. And then just that video of them driving through the desert in a classic car, right? I think it was a Camaro. And it's kind of funny. You see Dave and Josh and Mark Lanigan driving through the desert, and they hit a deer, and it's a funny video, and it's kind of that Josh Homme sense of humor. But I mean, what a killer first single too. And it's a super strange song if you listen to it. Like, it doesn't sound normal. There's some different parts. There's metal in it. There's like some thrashy parts. Then there's some stoner parts. And then he's got this strange, like kind of high-pitched, high register singing, and it works.
I'm surprised they didn't run into the guys from Audio Slave driving around the Camaro.
I know, right?
Dodge. I'm surprised they didn't run into each other.
That would have been an awesome crossover collaboration video.
They missed the opportunity there. But yeah, right. I know Guitar Hero too. Guitar Hero put that album and that song back into the minds of all the kids, bringing it, with Queens of the Stone Age being brought into a whole new generation, carrying some momentum. And I noticed too. Well, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a really big Queens of the Stone Age fan, and we were talking about Song for the Deaf, and I mentioned how Grohl was on drums, and it's funny because it seems like the Queens of the Stone Age fans forget about that. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, I forgot that Dave did that. When some people are like, that's the only thing they reference is because of the Dave Grohl frame.
Right.
But either way, it helped the band out, and I know Dave explores the Caius connection in Sonic Highways. He explores that connection a lot more, and that's when I first heard about it.
Yeah, Dave, it's funny, a lot of times when you have collaborative musicians from other bands or super groups or whatever you want to call them, they're just getting together to make a record, right? And then the regular band does their own thing. But for this record, the very first tour, Dave Grohl was part of the band. I mean, he took a legitimate break from Foo Fighters, and he went on tour. In fact, when I bought the CD the day it came out, and it came with like a bonus DVD if you bought it from this particular record store. And in the DVD, it shows the making of the band, or the making of the record with the band, and kind of what they went through. And then they show, Dave in the studio and doing all this. And then they talk about a tour, and then they show in that DVD the first couple live shows where they went out to small clubs and played these songs for the first time. And it's just, talk about just tons of energy, super intense. And you could tell that they gelled, like a band like that, especially with Dave behind the kit, because he's such a plodding, heavy-handed player, right? And it works for that sound. And then, the videos are all over YouTube, but you can go watch, videos from that summer tour from when that album was released with Dave, out on tour with him, playing big festivals in Europe, and it's killer.
You mentioned, you forget, it puts me back in the mind frame there of 2002. Was it on one of those enhanced CDs? You remember, this is before you had all the videos there. Well, we did have Headbangers Ball 2, I think, came out. We had Uranium and some other outlets. But I remember you had to buy the CDs that had the enhanced CD, and you would pop it in your CD-ROM tray, and you could load up the extra videos and stuff from the band. Those were the best.
This one, I don't think this one was, I'd have to get my CD out. My CDs are in a different room, but I think it was 2. I think it was a DVD, because it was one of those ones where you open up the jewel case, right? And the DVD's underneath as you open it up. It was like that. But yeah, I totally remember the hidden content, right? The bonus content on the enhanced CD-ROM CD. That's funny. So, All right, 2002, it wraps up that year. Queens of the Stone Age, Songs for the Deaf. All right, we'll move into 2003, and we only have one record and one band for 2003, and that's As I Lay Dying with their Frail Words Collapse. Corey?
Yeah, so thanks for putting As I Lay Dying on there. I'm a big As I Lay Dying fan, and I kind of stuck with them through the whole Tim Lambesis thing. This is pre-Tim getting in trouble and doing a little stint in prison. But I think the As I Lay Dying story is really fascinating because it all plays out on the internet. And it all starts with this opening album, this debut album, Frail Words Collapse. This is it's a metalcore sound. It's starting to take shape. And I think they take what's a little bit rough. I think they start to solidify what metalcore is. And this is a great example. And at first, the vocals for me were too harsh. It was too much to take.
Really interesting.
Yeah. But then I sat down with the CD and I listened to the CD while reading the lyrics, and it all opened up for me. And going through the screaming parts and then the clean parts were almost the payoff. And getting the concepts and the great writing. Behind Me Lays Another Fallen Soldier. Forever ended up 94 Hours. Forever ended up being a song where people would sing along with. And then I saw them live a few years or a year or so later at Ozfest, but just brutal double bass drums. It's a little bit clicky because I'm sure they're using that trigger on the bass, but that didn't slow me down. And I think their first 3 albums are really good. And then their whole story ended up playing out on the internet, where Tim got into some legal, he got into trouble. You can look that up online. We could talk about details about that and opinions at another time. But he paid his price. He's out of prison. And then in the meantime, the guys in the band go start. Was it not Woven War? Maybe it was Woven War. But they're pretty much left with nothing without him. And he made his huge, terrible mistake. But then they come back, they reunite. They do this. They get together in this kind of a boardroom, kind of a meeting room, and they all get together and they share what happened, and they just open up their feelings, and they're upset at each other. And Tim basically apologizes. The band comes back together, and in 2019 they release another album. But I say all of that to build up my case that As I Lay Dying is a legitimate metalcore band. They don't do it for the sake of just being a part of the scene. I think they're great musicians in the band, and they have a great catalog of metalcore.
Yeah, don't really have much more to add to that. I will say that the whole clean versus guttural vocals, or clean versus dirty vocals, however you want to call it, they kind of set the template for that for a lot of the bands that would follow, right? Because a lot of the metalcore bands, when I think of, especially early on, like Lamb of God, they didn't have clean singing. It was straight, dirty vocals the whole time. But these guys would have, dirty vocals during the verse and then clean singing in the chorus. And then they would kind of mix and match with the kind of an anthemic chorus. And I think them, along with a few other bands from this time, kind of
like Killswitch Engage.
Yeah, kind of set the ground.
Adam Dukowitz was a genius and a master at that. And I also, with Frail Words Collapse, just another note, I think it has a little bit of a punk element to it because they weren't over structuring their metalcore. They weren't structuring it exactly to fit this new template. It was still felt like they were spontaneous and maybe a little bit rough with how they were putting the songs together.
Yeah, they definitely had the hardcore punk aesthetics to early on, right? They even looked like it too.
And that was gone after that album, but
right. All right, As I Lay Dying, Frail Words Collapse, 2003. All right, that's the only one, so we'll move on to 2004. Again, we have this is our tied for our biggest decade as far as the number of different bands and albums we have. So Damage Plan, Newfound Power, Mastodon, Leviathan, In Flames, Soundtrack to Your Escape, and then Shadows Fall, The War Within. Right off the bat, Damage Plan, Newfound Power. This was an album that was long. People had been fans of Pantera had been waiting for something to come out outside of Anselmo's solo stuff, but something for Brothers Abbott to come out. And they did. They released a what I think is a great record. It's not Pantera. Yeah, it has Dime's riffs, and Vinny has that, super produced sound, if you will, even though that's how they sounded live as well. They were that good and that tight. But obviously you have a new front man to come in and lead the charge. And unfortunately it only lasted maybe 1 year, maybe a little bit longer than 1 year. But and then of course we all know what happened in that fateful day in December 8th, 2004, during a Damage Plan show. But I think more than anything, I think Dime and Vinny especially, they needed this, because like I said, I've read a number of books on their whole career, and they were basically sitting around doing nothing once, Pantera ended, just waiting for Anselmo to, give him a call and say, okay, I'm not mad anymore. Let's make another Pantera record, because these guys hadn't done anything with anybody else. They have been Pantera since the early 80s. That's all they had ever done. Their whole entire life was dedicated to Pantera. And so for them to come out and release a killer record that was not Pantera, and it was still heavy and really good record, they needed that, I think. And that really gave them the energy to move forward, that they could indeed write new music, and they could do it with other musicians, and not just, rely on what they had done with Pantera. So, because Pantera created a huge shadow just over metal. I mean, they were the biggest metal band of the 90s, and arguably maybe of the first year or two of the 2000s. I mean, they influenced so many, and to just have that huge cloud hanging over them, but for them to be able to break away and release a record like this, I think says a lot about their talent as songwriters and musicians.
Absolutely. And being able to push forward with all that, we'll never be them. We'll never be Phil, and know what he was going through.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff that was the only thing we could see what was in the
press. Yeah.
It was in the press. And, of course I don't know, there's a lot of fallout from that, but Damage Plan, Newfound Power, when that came out, I bought that CD right away.
Me too, man. I couldn't wait.
I couldn't wait. They were back. I think they, I don't know if they got the nod or the go ahead, or like Dime. I vaguely remembering some kind of interview where Dime made a comment about, letting Phil know they were going forward with the band. And he said,
it was on Headbangers Ball.
Is that it?
Yeah, with Jamie Josta.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
And then, but I bought the CD, and then of course the legacy, that how it ended is just, it's horrible how it falls apart. So, in 2000, I had to work that night. So I was working night shift. I knew they were doing a show at Alrosa Villa, which is in my hometown here. I've been to many shows at Alrosa Villa, and I was out checking inbounds.
That's crazy, man.
I was out driving through the warehouse on my little go-kart, checking inbounds, checking inbound accuracy from the account that we worked in, and playing on my little boom box. I'd bring the little radio with me, and I was playing Damage Plan because they were playing that night. And I swing back up into the office, and I walk into the office, and Kurt, who works with me at the time, and he knows I have a big metalhead, and he's like, dude, he's like, did you hear what happened? He said, Dimebag's been shot and killed. There's some kind of activity going on. And I think he was trying to pull it up on the internet, or we were trying to pull it up on the news, but it was just a really, just a shocking, horrible night. And then to see those news play out, that as soon as I got home, all I did was stay up late watching the news, and in the next couple of days. So having that be the legacy of Alrosa Villa and the end of the band, all I can do is look back at the 90s, look at the albums, look at what Pantera was, and all of the things, and the new page, the thing that they were doing, and Dime and Vinny were doing to bring new music back together for the fans. All they wanted to do is play metal. All they wanted to do is be in a rock and roll band and party. And the way it had to end is just unfortunate.
Yeah, it's again, we mentioned it a couple times making the series, but it's just something that it's awful. It's something I don't think I'll ever come to terms with, just being a fan of the band and what had happened. When I was actually in New York visiting a friend for the holidays, he had just moved there, and So I was, him and his wife actually, and I wasn't married at the time, so I just stayed with them for a couple of weeks. And he was, of course, a big Pantera fan. And we were listening. Eddie Trunk, who we all know from many years of, being a metal and rock critic, having his own radio shows, producing series, and writing books. He has a radio show still to this day, a terrestrial radio show in New York, and we were listening to Eddie Trunk's show at that time he was on during the day, had a live show, and he announced it, and I just remember being like, what? I was like, no, can't happen. And then once we found out, yeah, but I remember them initially reporting that there was a shooting, Dimebag Darrell, and there were in Ohio at the place, there was a shooting, and we don't have a confirmation of who's been killed or hurt or injured. We just know there was a shooting where a crazy guy jumped on stage and opened fire. So I remember thinking, I was like, you know what, he's going to be okay. Even though in the back of my mind I knew that I don't think he's going to be okay. Like several people have already reported it. So yeah, crazy time, but I think
sad day for metal.
Yep. I think that having that record as we move forward, and I choose to think of it now as that, I don't choose to think of Damage Plan as being tainted with what happened. It's a great record. And so as we move forward, maybe it's part of the healing process. I've used that record. You know what? This is just a killer rock record. I've separated it from the tragedy. And when you do that, at least for me, it's a killer record for a killer bunch of musicians.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's Damage Plan, Newfound Power. Moving on. Also in 2004, we have Mastodon, first appearance for Mastodon with Leviathan. Love this record. Always been a big Mastodon fan. They've definitely changed, throughout their career. I'd say they are more kind of death metal, maybe even had a little bit of a doom metal element with some of their slower songs, more melodic, plotting type songs. But with Leviathan, they kind of went straight prog, right? Basically telling the classic story of Moby Dick with this record.
Have you ever read Moby Dick?
I have, yeah. You?
No, but listening to this album makes me want to read it.
Yeah, you should. You know what you should do is you should put on this record and read Moby Dick. Or,
There you go.
Obviously you'd finish the record before you just put it on repeat.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, what can I say? This is a classic record. Again, this was kind of, I guess they've always maybe been considered prog metal, but I think with this record for sure, and especially with what they do now, pretty much every record can date back to this as having, those prog, even kind of, records that tell a story with this record. So let's see here. Where's my notes on it? Were you into Mastodon prior to this record?
No, it took me a little while to get hip to Mastodon for sure. But now it's just like incredible. This, of course, I didn't get into Mastodon when this album came out. It took me a while to get into them. I thought Mastodon was like a death metal, or I don't know,
right.
not death metal, but like a black metal or something. I just really didn't know. I didn't know. I don't know. I blame their marketing. I blame their marketing department.
I think, yeah, no, I can completely see why you would think that. I mean, like I said, especially with what they had done prior to this, which was more of a death metal type sound. I've even heard this particular record, not only that it's a prog record and it's a concept album, right? But also that they even added some sludge metal elements in this record, which appear on their later records. I think sludge is probably a better descriptor for them than doom, because they're definitely not doom. They're more of a sludge sound to them. But this record, for sure, there's tons of just killer riffs. I think this album, at least for mainstream metal, if you're going to call it that, more popular metal, I think this album was like the return of the riff, right, as being the centerpiece of metal music. Because I mean, that's how it started, right? All the way back to Black Sabbath, you have a riff, right? Tony Iommi, the riff master,
Yeah, good
and
point.
pretty much every decade after that, you know, you can hum your favorite riffs. And then, not to say that there weren't riffs in the late 90s and the first decade of the 2000s, but I think maybe the riff wasn't as big of a selling point for
It
the
was more
music.
about layers of distorted guitars.
Yep. And, you know, maybe more about the vocals or the singing style for later metal bands. But I think with this record, I mean, it's just every song has a memorable riff. I could hum the riffs now in my head. So, do you have this on wax? Oh, wait a minute. It's right behind you.
I do.
That's pretty
Yeah, so
funny.
I love concept albums. I don't think there's many concept albums I don't like, even if you go back to the 70s, King Crimson or
Oh,
Pink
yeah.
Floyd The Wall, Queensryche, you know, Operation Mindcrime. I love concept albums, and this is no, uh, this is not anything different for me. So, but like first, the album artwork just draws you in. That's
Yeah,
one
it
of the
really
best.
does.
Yeah, that's one of the top, I think, all time. It should be on the top 5 list for me as far as album artwork and being able to draw you in, and that meticulous detail of that painting that's on there is just, it's just fantastic. And then the complexity of the music, the riffs, the payoffs, you know, the listening, going through, and I don't know, like it's a lot to take in. But when I finally started to listen to Leviathan, I was in hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
You know, major Mastodon fan after that. A lot of respect for the band, and then I mean, it restored like kind of restored what metal was about for me too. When I was kind of maybe lost, feeling around in the dark with all the different things going on, I was like, wow, these guys getting together, working so hard in the studio to produce something like this, and
Right.
kind of a Pro Tools era, and to have it come out is so magnificent. It's just it's an unbelievable album. It's a piece of artwork.
Yeah, it really is. Completely agree. I noticed the cover of your copy back there. Is that the special edition cover, right? 'Cause
I don't know. I just think it's one of the reissues that came out. It's
okay.
one of the many reissues. I have no
Yeah.
idea which one. I think it's probably a 14 or a 12.
Okay. Yeah, mine is same, but I have the just, you know, the half cover with just the first half of the whale coming out of the water. But yeah, again, killer records. And it's funny thing is, it's a concept record, and usually, at least the stereotype is, you think of prog and you don't think of, you can't say prog and accessible in the same sentence, right? Because it's, people are going to be lost. You know, it's, you know, they're going to think it's either it's not catchy or it doesn't have, you know, melody or whatever. But this record, man, it's catchy. As crazy as that sounds, for a concept record about Moby Dick. Like, if you just said that to somebody and didn't know anything else about it, you'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to listen to that. So, but yeah, I think you're right. It brought metal back to everything that is great about metal and can be great about metal. So, all right, Mastodon, Leviathan. We have 2 more in 2004. Next up, we have In Flames, Soundtrack to Your Escape. I'll let you lead this one, Corey.
Yeah, it seems like most fans either love this or hate it. When I say fans, I mean like metal fans, not necessarily In Flame fans. A lot of In Flame fans are usually, what was it, Steel Bath? They're usually fans of the first few Oracle, first few albums, which I totally
Jester
get.
Race.
Very, yeah, which are incredible albums, thrashy. Here, this is where they, you know, are influenced and going in that direction, building in that. Like, hey, everybody else is being melodic. We can do that too. Not only that, but we are Swedish, so
right.
we can pull this off better than most of y'all. But when Soundtrack to Your Escape came out, I really liked it. I think I saw the videos first for like Trigger, My Sweet Shadow. There was another one. Let me check my notes. Quiet Place.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is the Quiet Place on this record? It is.
Those videos were out. I downloaded those videos and built them into my like video playlist. Where, you know, burning DVDs in 2004 was big. I had my DVD burner, and I would make copies of this and pass them out to my friends. And there would be bands like As I Lay Dying, 36 Crazy Fists, just all of that kind of stuff. Anything that was even remotely metal at the time. would find its way on these mixes, these video mixes, and the soundtrack to Your Escape was no different. I just really enjoy the album, so I get it. Like Fiend was another really good song on there, but great melodies. It's melodic, mix of scream, as well as with the clean vocals, just Swedish death metal, and a solid addition to the album, or to the catalog, their catalog. Even though they're like Come Clarity, maybe a better album, but for some reason we both agreed and it ended up on this list. I didn't care as long as some In Flames got on here, because they started way back.
Yeah, oh yeah. They were part of the original Swedish death metal scene, along with like At the Gates, and of course them, and then maybe Soilwork, and then there was maybe a couple other. But yeah, they were one of the first bands as part of that scene. Yeah, you mentioned early on about the fans. They're actually a super polarizing band, because you have the first part of In Flames, right? That the longtime fans, or the true fans, whatever you want to call them, a certain sector of those fans, that they can do no wrong. But then basically after, what was it, Reroute to Remain, which was the final sound of that first half of their career.
Which is my introduction to the band.
Yeah, mine too, actually. And then they released this record, which, like you said, clean singing, and the music was completely different. And I know I've talked to people who are, were big fans of that whole scene, and they hate this record. They absolutely hate it. They're like, they sold out. I can't, they're not even the same band. And I disagree. I'm with you, man. I think it's a great record. I think it just shows their diversity. That they can expand their repertoire, right? They don't want to just play one style, because with metal, and we saw this with thrash, and we saw this with death metal, you can only make the same record over and over again, right? Before it's just,
right.
You need something different. And I think because this metal in general is such a dense form of music, there's not a whole lot of places to go with that one sound. So them incorporating, I'd say more even like alt metal type sounds into this, into their music with this album, kind of really shows. And I think that also helps them progress, not only them, but the genre as a whole progress, because it's really easy to get stuck in one style, like death metal, for example. I mean, there's only so many places you can take it before you need to start, in my opinion, doing something different.
I almost want to ask somebody. I need to ask one of my friends that they totally flip the switch off and are indifferent to alternative metal, almost of any style. And anytime it leaks in, whether it's Deftones or maybe Mastodon might be an exception, but In Flames, I want to ask them what it is about alternative metal that flips a switch for you. Where I don't understand that, because like as a fan of rock and metal, I'm going along, I'm listening to Tool, and I'm listening to all these Fear Factory, and I'm enjoying all this stuff. And then I start to read online or talk to people that are just like, what are you talking about? That's alternative metal. Get out of here with that garbage. And I'm like,
right. They're missing so much. I mean, shoot, Faith No More I would consider alternative metal. We've already talked about Prong. Yeah. Killer band. Primus, I would even consider alt metal. Helmet, we talked about Helmet in the 90s. They're missing out on so many great heavy bands. They're doing different stuff. They're bringing in the left brain, the indie side, and then of course Tool, maybe the biggest alternative metal band of all time. But yeah, that's a good point. I have tons of diehard metal friends who are huge fans that they're the same thing. They're like, alternative metal, like what? They're not metal or whatever. I just think they're missing out.
yeah, I respect it, but they're missing out, and I don't get the disconnect. So what else do we have? What's up?
Yep, next? Shadows Fall. That was In Flames, soundtrack to Your Escape. We have Shadows Fall, the last one in 2004. The War Within. This one is all yours. I'm not as familiar with this record. I did listen to this record a couple of times before we did this, but I'll let you take the lead on it.
Shadows Fall. This is another, I guess you could, like In Flames. I saw them at Ozfest, and once I got one of those compilation CDs from Century Media, Roadrunner, Ferret, any one of those compilation albums, started playing a lot of this metal. The metal scene was exploding in 2004, and one of those ones that came across was Shadows Fall. Incredible band. They're more metal. They're even more of a thrash band than anything else. But I think they get lumped in to this metalcore scene.
Yep.
That had a beginning, or had roots. It had a beginning. It had a peak, and then it also dropped off. And I think they got sucked up and became obsolete because they were drawn, or because they were lumped in with that the worst of that genre. Yep. So that's unfortunate, because if you take The War Within and play it, it's heavy.
It's a thrash record, man. That's the first thing I thought.
It's a thrash.
This is a modern thrash record. This is not metalcore. I didn't hear metalcore at all in this record.
And I don't know why they get lumped in with that. Just because it's metal, they didn't know what else to do with it. But Brian Fair, I don't think he was the original singer, but he had huge long dreads and just was real entertaining to watch. They had great videos. They were always on the Headbangers Ball too, and I just always dug Shadows Fall. Now, I did have the digipack or whatever, and I did sell it. So I need to find that album. I'd like to get it. I don't even know if it was ever released on vinyl.
I think there's a reissue.
That would be awesome. I need to pick that up. But Massachusetts band, thrash, probably came out of the same camp as like Killswitch Engage, but they don't have the melodic metalcore sound. But killer band, killer album, and then their catalog has a few other real interesting albums. I think we were going back and forth whether or not to put The War Within or
Art of Balance.
Art of Balance. So, but yeah, I was glad they made the top 20 list for 2000, because I think they had a major impact, underrated band.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoyed the album very much. And again, yeah, I think it was a thrash record in my mind. All right, well, let's move on to, we don't have anything in 2005. We have nothing there. So let's move on to 2006, where we have one, and lo and behold, Tool appears again, this time with 10,000 Days. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they started to show a trend with all their records after Enema, that it would take them forever, at least 5 years, which was the case with this one, to release a record. And then all the rumors, are they going to release a record? When's it going to come out? What's it going to sound like? You maybe hear leaked stuff on the internet, especially for 10,000 Days, but killer record. I don't think Tool's made a bad record, and this is a perfect example of the band doing what they want to do on their terms, right? Without outside influence.
And I know some of the Tool fans, put this one down a little bit lower. I love 10,000 Days when it came out. This is one I specifically remember coming out as a midnight release. I had scheduled an hour or two off work with night shift.
Yeah.
Driving to Walmart, listening to Tool constantly, driving to Walmart with my windows down, just playing Tool as loud as I can. I don't know, picking up maybe other Tool fans who are in the parking lot, and then kind of walking in and like, where are the new CDs at? I remember going back to the CD section. I didn't see it. They ended up having it on display up front, and buying the package. It had a really cool, it had the cool packaging.
Yeah.
With
the killer packaging.
Stereo.
Particular color or cover.
What stereo? I thought they were like stereo, some kind of stereotropic, whatever it was. You held it up a certain way and looked through the glass to see the picture in stereo. Stereo something, not lenticular. I think lenticular. I think was the
Lateralis.
Lateralis.
Right. Yep.
And
I know what you're talking
layers.
about. Yep, because it had the faces on the cover, right, and then the different layers of the face.
Yeah, and then you could flip through the CD case and hold up different pictures and look through the stereoscope. But
That's right.
it was just awesome. And then I call it painting music. You're gonna crack up. So, but when we got a new place in '98, I listened to Undertow all the time, because I just needed a CD player, and I didn't have my stereo because I was painting. So I just had this cheap, crappy CD player, and I played Undertow in a lot. So in 2006, we got a new house. I was again painting the rooms, and while I was painting, I ended up popping in 10,000 Days and just rolled with it. I mean, some Jane's Addiction and some other stuff, but I remember that CD specifically. It's great painting music, because what are you stuck doing? You're stuck working. It's monotonous, but you can hear everything going on that CD. You can listen to it from front to back and appreciate it as a whole. John B is a great track on there. It's Tool. It's a journey. It's a voyage. You press play, and when it's over, you ended up somewhere else than where you started from. That's what I always liked about the band.
Yeah, and you have to sit down and really take the album in. I don't think any Tool record, especially newer Tool records or later Tool records, you can just listen to once and then make your assessment off that one listen.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to. I think that's actually a really good activity to do while listening to this record would be painting.
I'm still working on this one too. I'm still taking this one in.
Yeah, I've listened to this newest record now 8 times. I try to listen to it every week, at least once. I really would
Nice.
like to throw it on my turntable, but
Yeah, that'd be
that's neither
nice.
here.
Come on, Tool.
All right, Tool, 10,000 Days, 2007. We don't have anything, so we have 2 years left, and we do have a collection of bands for these last 2 years of the first decade of the new millennium. 2008, we have, believe it or not, two old school thrash bands who made the cut. And there was a lot of great metal releases in 2008. Some from classic bands like the Melvins. I think Metallica released Death Magnetic. And then, Opeth, I think, released a record. Maybe Gojira appeared in this year with a killer record. But I think both of us felt that none of those records were as strong as these next two records. So we have Death Angel with Killing Season, and then Testament, Formation of Damnation. So both phenomenal records from phenomenal bands, and even maybe a return to form.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see thrash metal make it into the decade here, and that's a trend that'll slowly start to proliferate as we go into the 2010s, which is exciting to see. Not just isolated to thrash, but typically thrash at the core bands from the 80s and the first waves, or second, third wave thrash bands, still making relevant music, and still to this day. I think there was kind of a revival of thrash metal, but we'll get into that in the 2010s. But it's really cool. Both Death Angel and Testament were knocking on the door of our 80s and 90s listen. I don't remember if they made it or not. I think like Practice What You Preach just quite didn't make it into our top 20.
Yeah.
Death Angel, Ultraviolence was that their only release in the 80s, because Act 3 ends up being 1990.
Yeah, well, you had Frolic in the Park.
Frolic in the Park. I mean, yeah, Frolic in the Park was 90 though, but I think that was knocking on the door. So it was a little frustrating not to see, some of my favorite thrash bands make it in there, but two thrash bands, both from California.
We said we got them in there. Maybe a little bit later, but we finally got them in there.
So I mean, at least they're releasing quality music in 2008 enough for us to put them up to the top. So with Death Angel, if you look at their website, and I like the way they do this. They have their band in 3 eras. They had the formation, they have the reformation, and then now the evolution, starting with a more recent album. So the reformation is just 2 albums, the second of which is Killing Season, which unfortunately it's pre-Will Carroll. I love their current drummer. I love Will Carroll. He has such a great personality. He's fantastic on the drums, but Marcos Ovita and Rob Castani just pushing the band forward after a bit of a hiatus, and then or 2 albums. Hey, we're back and we're serious about it. And they went through a real bumpy time in the 90s, so it's really good to see Death Angel. But they haven't quite gotten on track yet. I think they will when they hit their Evolution albums. But at least they're out there making albums, and they're starting to get back in there again. Because I love Death Angel. There's nobody. Yeah. They're just that band that just wants to play. They just want to do it for the fans, and they're just real genuine, down to earth guys. And then with Testament, the Formation of Damnation, Alex Skolnick, I think that's his. I can't remember if he left and came back, or if he leaves after this one. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think this was his return, if I'm not mistaken.
Was this his return?
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I couldn't, because I felt like he had left, and either this was his comeback album, or he was going to leave after this one. But Testament hadn't done a whole lot. But this right here starts Testament's path all the way to like Brotherhood of the Snake, which I hope makes it into our 2010s list.
I think it may.
Not sure if we did that one or not, but Paul Bostaff on drums on that one, right? In and out of Slayer, but I think he was on that album.
Yeah, so this record, we kind of just mentioned this, but yeah, this was their first release with original lead guitarist Alex Skolnick. Gosh, since The Gathering.
Yeah, I
No,
mean
I'm sorry, not The Gathering. Since The Ritual. Since '92 is The Ritual. But this was actually their first new material, really, since, gosh, what was that? 2001.
oh my gosh, I didn't think it was that. Souls of Black.
No, Souls of Black was '90s. I don't remember. I think it was First Strike, Still
I'm just
Deadly.
at this point, I'm just throwing out albums.
Yeah. But yeah, no, to have Alex Skolnick come back into the band, that's such a huge loss, even though they did release records in the '90s after he left.
What did he do? Did he go play with TSO or something?
Yeah, he's got a jazz fusion project that he does. I think it's just called Skolnick. That he's like a trio that they've done. And I mean, everybody who's a fan of this band knows Alex. He's one of the virtuosos in the metal world, and he can play any style really. So he did his solo thing for a while, and then yeah, he still plays with TSO. I think he's one of the guitarists for the TSO East, because they split it into two touring factions, because they tour just during Christmas, and so they can't hit everywhere.
It makes more sense. That's right.
So there's the West Coast that has like Al Petrelli as the kind of the main guy that runs the West Coast TSO, and then you have the East Coast TSO, and I'm pretty sure Skolnick still is one of the guitarists for that. But I'm really glad Skolnick's back. I love this record. I thought this was a return to form for them, just to have him back there, and not only his virtuosic playing, but he's also added back to the songwriting, right? The songwriting process. And I don't know, just to have him in there. I always thought him and rhythm guitarist Eric Peterson, if I'm remembering his name, Eric Peterson. I always thought that they made a sound together, and when you removed Skolnick, it didn't sound the same. Even though like I said, they made good albums in the '90s. Like Low comes to my mind from a great '90s record that did not have Skolnick, but with those two together, they complement each other so well, because Peterson is such a good rhythm guitar player, and we know Skolnick is a killer lead player. So yeah, I think it was a return to form, and yeah, I think it really did. It set the stage for where Testament is today, still a force to be reckoned with in thrash metal and in metal in general. And hopefully they'll continue moving forward with this kind of classic lineup.
I was a little frustrated when the Big Four started doing their tour. What was it, 2010 or so?
Yeah.
I was a little frustrated when Testament they tacked Testament on there as part of some of the live shows. But I remember watching some of the video and just saw the crowd was pretty sparse. I didn't see the support for Testament like I thought, because if there was a Big Five kind of thing, some people say Exodus or Overkill, but I always voted for Testament. And I was a little frustrated that I felt like more people should have turned out for those shows.
I completely agree. They're missing out. All right, that wraps up 2008. We got one more year here, and then we'll wrap up. But 2009, we've got 4 artists. Mastodon makes another appearance with Crack the Sky. We have an appearance from a classic metal band. Used to be Black Sabbath, but since Black Sabbath had reunited with Ozzy in the late 2000s, they still wanted to do the Dio stuff before Dio passed away, and so they were reborn, if you will, and they changed their name to Heaven and Hell, obviously a throwback to that first record with Dio. So they appear on here: Heaven and Hell, The Devil You Know, Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue, and then Megadeth, Endgame. Mastodon, Crack the Sky. Again, great record, great band. I know some initially, and actually I didn't take to this record right away. It took a couple listens, but now it's one of my favorite Mastodon records. Mastodon, I think, is one of those bands, especially from Leviathan on, don't think they have released a bad record. Some may disagree, but I think they have such a solid catalog. and they are who they are, right? I mean, they are a prog metal band with some sludge and maybe even some thrash and death metal influences, but killer record by Mastodon.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Heaven and Hell, Devil You Know. As a little side story, of course, I remember this. I remember watching the DVD. I don't even remember where I saw it. Maybe I borrowed it from somebody, or maybe I watched it online. But there's a live DVD of one of the shows, Heaven and Hell shows, when they toured with Dio and they played a few shows before he passed. But I was in a record store, I don't know, 4 years ago, and they released this record, The Devil You Know. It was a reissue on vinyl, and first I saw it, I was like, oh, maybe this is like some of the live shows or something, but it wasn't. It was the actual record, and man, absolute killer. So I bought it right away. And I can honestly say that, I was not listening to this record back in 2009. So I really didn't start to get into it until, 2016, 2015, something like that. When this came out, I think it was released in 2016. So, were you aware of this, or were you listening to Heaven and Hell back in 2009?
I was not, but I got a guy at work, been friends for a long time, Captain. We go back and forth, and he's been a big music mentor of mine, a big educator, and he's a huge Dio fan. And when I was digging up, trying to put together discographies for him, stumbled into these albums, and this album with Dio and Heaven and Hell is like, oh my gosh, what? This is amazing. Like the song Bible Black, I think, is on there.
Yeah.
And I think that song makes it into people's top 20 list for all time best, song. I was going to say Sabbath songs, but I mean, it's Heaven and Hell. Maybe they should have even done that to begin with.
I think so.
In 1980, with that album release, but this tragic loss of one of the heavy metal's greatest with Dio. And then the way he brings that magic and the everything that he brought to all the music that he touched was just phenomenal. And it just seemed like they were just going to be growing more and bigger and tour. And I never did get to see Dio, so it was going to be my chance to do that. But the album cover, again, I'm a big on art. I probably keep mentioning this, so you probably know it by now. I'm big on the album cover art. And the album cover art on that is just scary. It's just fantastic. It just matches the music perfectly.
Yeah,
but
it really does.
Benny Appice on drums, just incredible. So another project that we wish could have kept going. And then, of course, a tragic end to Dio, but he left us with a legacy of music. So
yeah, and I'm glad they got to make one more record with him. So Heaven and Hell, The Devil You Know. All right, Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue. This record for me, I can't say that I was excited, because at least the way I initially thought, I'm like, Alice in Chains is done. Lane Staley is gone. There's no way you can replace an iconic frontman, but not only an iconic frontman, but an iconic sound vocally that he made with Jerry Cantrell. I just didn't see how that could happen. But like any true fan of Alice in Chains, we were like, okay, arms folded probably. But I remember when it came out, I got it right when it came out, and I made it a point not to go on YouTube and watch, because I know they had released a promo video for it, but I didn't want to watch anything. I wanted to make my own judgment on it before, reading what other people have to say about it. And I got to say, man, I was blown away. I think it's a return to form for Alice in Chains. They are Alice in Chains. They are who they are, and that's the music they make. But to have Jerry Cantrell take a guy like Will Duvall, who is completely different than Lane Staley, completely different. He sings different. He has a different register. He's a different guy. But to be able to still do the Alice in Chains thing with those 2-part harmonies and vocals that make them who they are, to me, that was incredible. And to me, that was just shows the level of respect that Jerry Cantrell had and has, and the band really as a whole has, for Alice in Chains, because he could have easily done the, let's get a new singer and cash in right on Alice in Chains, and just done the, let's just play old songs. Kind of like, I believe, like Stone Temple Pilots did with their new singer that they just brought in. The guy looks and sounds just like Scott Weiland. And to me, that's a slap in the face. Why would you want to copy something that is will never happen again. So with Alice in Chains, with this record, Black Is Way to Blue, it's a haunting record. It's a sad record. It's basically Jerry and the guys saying goodbye to Lane. The title track, Black Is Way to Blue, is a goodbye to Lane. But my opinion, return to form. And it's like a new era of the band, like Sabbath with Ozzy one era, and then you have Dio with another era, or AC/DC with, the two different eras for them. Same thing with Alice in Chains. They reinvented themselves, but they're still Alice in Chains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was tracking right along with you, and it's funny. I thought of STP, and then all your analogies and your examples, I was like right there because I was thinking STP. Who else have done this? Like AC/DC, a Journey.
Yeah.
Journey went and found. I mean, that was kind of a little bit unrelatable, but but I think Cantrell. I think he waited an appropriate amount of time too.
He did.
I mean, and I know he was probably wrestling and grappling with the idea of what he should and shouldn't do, and knowing, when you bring this back, it's got to be right. And I think there was a big gap in there, and I think
14 years between records, and then 7 years before when Lane died in 2002. And the thing that I think gave it the stamp of approval was Lane Staley's mother. They were going to release something, but they were going to be something completely. They were going to call it something different. And Lane Staley's mother, who he still keeps in contact with to this day, was like, "No, Lane would want you to carry on as Alice in Chains. The way that you've done this. The guy who's Will Duvall is his own dude. He's his own guy. You're not trying to copy something that will never happen again." But she said, you release it and use the Alice in Chains name. This is what Lane would have wanted. So to have that stamp from the guy's mom that's a pretty big deal. And it shows a lot about, just the character of the guys in that band. So.
And another thing I learned out of this album is I think I underappreciated Jerry Cantrell's contributions to during the Staley albums.
All of us did.
I was like, wait a minute, what? I was like, how much of this weight how much of that weight and how much was his contributions? I thought it was all Staley. So
yeah, it was mostly Cantrell. Musically, the guy is a phenomenal songwriter. I think he's one of the best of the 90s metal and hard rock era. I think he's one of the best ever. He's not a shreddy, flashy guitar player. He always plays the right note at the right time. He is the David Gilmour of heavy music, because he always plays the right note at the right time. He can do the fast stuff if he needs to, but he's not doing that. He's serving the song. His solos aren't to show off. His solo serves the song.
Like Alex Lifeson comes to mind too.
Exactly. So yeah.
Joe Walsh.
Kudos to Alice in Chains and Cantrell, and they're still going strong to this day.
Elton John was on that track too, on the piano part too.
Yeah, they did the Black Is Way to Blue. Yeah, he I guess who would have thought Elton John was a fan of Alice in Chains, but apparently he was.
There it is.
All right, last record here before we wrap up. We have Megadeth with Endgame, and Corey, I'll let you take this final one home.
Yeah, so I don't know if this was intended to be Megadeth's last album. I know David Ellefson wasn't in the band at the time, and they were going through that lawsuit and all that stuff was going back and forth. Chris Broderick was brought in on this album, but for me, this is the best Megadeth album in a while, because they had gone through, I can't rattle them off right now, but Risk and a lot of things were going on. Megadeth was trying some different things, but this, fast forward to 2009, and this gets ready to, this is kind of strange theme, because Megadeth, Death Angel, and Testament all begin a path within that 2 years that sets this tone for some excellent out. Sets the path for dystopia, But Endgame, I really like the song. It was at 44 minutes, I believe. I don't have the song list in front of me, but I thought it was
I think it was the
solid
third
album
track on the album.
I felt like Megadeth was back. Great songwriting, great riffs. Dave Mustaine all over the place, driving that. And then close to the end of that year, the album had already come out. David Ellefson announces that he's going back to the band, and then I'm able to see them in 2010. And wow. I think that just sets them on the right track. I was able to see them, and they performed Rust in Peace all the way through. I think it was a year after the anniversary of that album.
Forgot they did that. That's
solid
awesome.
album.
You got to see that.
And then glad Megadeth got into our top 10. Of course, I think we did have, I don't know if we did
Yeah, we had Rust and Peace in the 90s.
Rust in Peace,
Yeah.
which Countdown to Extinction. Those are all amazing albums. So I'm glad to
Yeah.
see Megadeth get back in there.
Yeah, agreed. This record, yeah, I personally, I think it's a top 5 Megadeth record. It's one of my favorite
Oh,
Megadeth
wow.
records. And up until Dystopia, I thought this was Megadeth's best record, maybe of all the 2000s, because it was so inconsistent. And you could just, the songwriting I didn't think was there on some of the earlier records. I didn't think the focus was there for Mustaine. I know he was dealing with a number of issues. At one point, I think maybe right around this time, he had the carpal tunnel thing, and he was to the point where he wasn't even sure he was going to be able to play guitar ever again. So I can't remember. I think that happened after this, but phenomenal record, one of my favorite Megadeth records. And yeah, up until this latest record, Dystopia, I thought it was their best record of the 2000s. So
yeah, I think you're right. He had that was before this, so he has already taught himself how to play again. So
that's right.
Maybe he was coming back with his book is really good. I've read his. I read David Ellison's book. Really good stuff behind the scenes. I recommend those to read those.
Yeah, agreed. I still haven't read Ellison's books, 2 incarnations of his book, My Life in and Out of Death, or
I haven't
whatever.
read his second one. I've read the first one.
Yeah, I read Mustaine's though, and he talks a lot about this. So excellent. Well, that wraps up our top 20 list. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, as always, we welcome your comments, and maybe if you would comment and leave some of your favorite records, or maybe disagree with some of the ones we put on here, that's cool too. We like all sides to come in and
disagree with John. Don't disagree with mine. Just disagree with John's list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all over the place. So, but yeah, Corey he's the Godfather. So.
Wait a minute. Are we going to do any honorable mentions, man? What do you got for your honorable mentions?
Oh, yeah. +5. Go with yours. I got to pull mine up.
Okay. So honorable mentions I wanted to work in here. So for you guys that like the post-hardcore, Hope's Fall, the Satellite Years. I think I don't know if it's a concept album. It feels like it to me. It definitely feels like one project, but I really like Hope's Fall. I don't know why, but they do a lot of scream vocals. So it's another one of those things where I have to get the album and read the lyrics usually once or twice, and then it's committed to memory. But I highly recommend this too, John. Maybe I'll send it over to you on the Google Drive and check it out. But just listen to the whole thing front to back. If you hate it, you hate it. If you like it, you like it. But I think there's a lot to offer there with textures and melodies and really great lyrics. And one of the best album closers for me, it would make probably my top 20 album closer list with the Hope's Fall on the last track there. But Killswitch Engage, Alive or Just Breathing. So rewind back to what we were talking about in the early 2000s. You have metalcore on the scene. Killswitch Engage. Adam Dukowitz is just a genius. He's coming out of Boston. Went to school at the famous Now I'm forgetting the name of it, but went to the famous music school there, and just does a great job producing albums. Probably his name is all over the place. I'm trying to remember. I can see the Fall of Ideals. No. Anyway, he's done a lot of production with the metalcore, and he's just really talented. Threat Signal, Under Reprisal, Christian Old, I think that's an Old A, whatever it is, but from Fear Factory, the bass player from Fear Factory. Fear Factory produced that Threat Signal album, melodic.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Double bass drums, clean scream vocals going back and forth, a lot of time changes. But and they're a Canadian metalcore band, so I really like Threat Signal. I was listening to them a lot. I don't think they get a lot of respect as far as the heavier fans. Trivium, their song that came out, "Pull Harder, the Strings of Your Martyr," was just a phenomenal track, and that was on the album Ascendancy. Was really killer. And then finally, more of an alternative rock band was Vast. I really liked Vast. I caught on to them in the late 90s because they got some radio play. And their album Music for the People just has really killer songs on it. It's all about John Crosby. He's a great, phenomenal writer and musician. And so I wanted to mention Vast, band out of Seattle.
Yeah, when you mentioned Vast the other day and just said that, I want to add that to my +5, I completely forgot about them. But yeah, I mean, they got onto my radar with that that record and that video that came out in the early 2000s. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but
I think there was Touched, there was Alive. I think you mentioned Alive.
was it Alive? Yeah, but
Free
yeah,
or
killer
Free.
band. And who would have thought from Seattle, because they didn't really have the Seattle sound, but they were
Totally different.
a great band. So awesome, man. That was a killer +5. I'll just go through mine real quick. Mine are in no particular order, but starting 2000, Electric Wizard, Dope Throne. Electric Wizard, Dope Throne. We have 2002, Down, their second record, Down to a Bustle in Your Hedgerow. 2004, Lamb of God with Ashes of the Wake. Plug to Alex Skolnick does a couple solos in that record. High on Fire, Blessed Black Wings. And then I have two more. We have The Sword with Age of Winners. And then my final record on here that, you kind of see a theme with mine, are all kind of stoner or sludge metal.
Yeah, I noticed
style.
you went more stoner and more of that route, doom, stoner, and then I went way more melodic metalcore. It's really interesting.
Right. That was kind of the idea. But and then my final one, again, staying I guess on the High on Fire thing, is Matt Pike's other band, his original band, Sleep, with 2003's Dope Smoker, which actually was a combination of Dope Smoker and the record that never ended up being released, Jerusalem. So they combined it in 2003 and just called it Dope Smoker. But that was actually a combination of another record that never got released. So that's my +5. Yeah, again, it's mostly stoner metal and kind of sludge stuff. So that was probably my favorite style, newer style that emerged in the first decade of the 2000s. I am a Black Sabbath soldier, and I always will be. From the first day that I heard Master of Reality, I was hooked. It was the most incredible thing I had ever heard when I first really got into metal. And every single one of these bands that I mentioned have not only Sabbath influences, but you could probably, especially with like Electric Wizard and Sleep and High on Fire, I mean, you can trace them all the way back to Master of Reality, basically set the stage for all their careers. So, well, that wraps it up. +5s again. Comment. We appreciate you guys watching. And then we'll come back here hopefully within the next week here and do the final installment from our top 20 series, where we'll do the year 2000 up until the current year, 2019, to kind of coincide with the change of a decade. So I imagine we'll have some familiar bands from this first decade appear on the second one, and then probably some new bands too. So
I gotta let me add, I'm ruining you're doing this really nice closer here.
Oh, sorry, man. I'm like jumping ahead.
It's okay. No. I think it was about time to close, but I just wanted to finish off with, I got an interesting fact, and then I wanted to throw something back your way. So we have 9 bands from California.
Wow.
So yeah, 9 bands from California, but we have Texas, England, Sweden, Georgia, Massachusetts, Canada, North Carolina, another one from Massachusetts, Florida, and Seattle. So it's not a little bit of diversity there, but it's interesting. 9 bands out of California out of this whole list. But some of the ones I felt like we missed or kind of went back and forth about. Halford had early 2000s release that was excellent. Judas Priest had Angel of Retribution, which was knocking on the door of this list. And then I was going to ask you, there's a big omission here with Slipknot. So I know a lot of metal fans are going to be like, "Hey, what's up with Slipknot? What's your?" I think Slipknot is another debut album was really, really good. I knew one of the band members was in my neighborhood. Like I would drive past his house, and then like he had. I'm doing like the whole name drop thing, but his kids would try to come over and play with my kids sometimes. But Slipknot. What was your take on Slipknot? Why didn't it make the list?
They almost made In my top 5, when I did my initial list, my final top 50 list that we extracted from, they were in my 2001 with Iowa, and they almost made my +5. I went back and forth between Iowa and High on Fire's Blessed Black Wings. So ultimately, I picked Blessed Black Wings, but maybe on another day I would have gone with Iowa. I like Slipknot. I don't really care for their newer stuff. To me, it just, I don't know. I need to spend more time with it. But their first record was great. But man, when I heard Iowa and that they were, I mean, they're at this point, they're a mainstream metal band, right? I mean, everybody knew who Slipknot was after that first record. And then they released an album like Iowa. They kind of went, in my mind, the Pantera route, where they just got heavier with their next release. And Iowa is my favorite Slipknot record. I think that's a brutally heavy record. And I know we're probably going to get hit up by some Slipknot fans. I'm like, how could you not have at least one record in the top 20? Yeah. So
I don't know if I was too old where I missed it or I just didn't get it. I'm not a fan of Corey Taylor. Throughout the years,
he runs his mouth all the time.
yeah, through the years and in the media, and from what I've seen, my reaction, I become less and less engaged with Slipknot because of that through the years, and I just don't feel like it's my band or a band I can call. I feel like it's someone else's or somebody else's that was younger than me, even in the 2000s, and then of course to this day. I think Corey Taylor has made a lot of missteps where I watch him in interviews and stuff like that. And I'm just like, it's just cringe.
Yeah.
And then I think his personality has a lot to do with, even with Stone Sour stuff. I just disconnect completely.
Hey, every era needs their new Phil Anselmo, right? We had Phil to,
That's
to
right.
pop off in the media and say stupid stuff. And then so now you have Corey for the new people. But
that's fair.
I'm kind of with you. I definitely was not like one of my favorite bands, but I do recognize their importance and that they did release great albums. And like I said, Slipknot, Iowa made my top 50 list and almost made my +5.
Thank you for indulging me. That's all I had. Don't have anything else.
I bow to you. So, all right. Well, that does it. Thanks everybody again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Corey?
Thanks guys. See you next time.